Marcus Williams had always looked younger than his 22 years. Standing barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, with a baby face that refused to show even the hint of stubble, he often got mistaken for a teenager. When he walked into the police academy on his first day, the other recruits couldn't help but snicker. Some whispered jokes about bringing their little brother to work. The academy was tough for everyone, but Marcus faced extra challenges. During physical training, bigger recruits would shoulder check him accidentally in the hallways. In the cafeteria, they'd move his tray when he wasn't looking, making him search for a place to sit. The worst part wasn't the pranks. It was the constant questioning of whether he belonged there at all. "Kid, you sure you're in the right place?" Sergeant Martinez asked during roll call one morning, though he knew perfectly well who Marcus was. The room erupted in laughter. Marcus kept his eyes straight ahead, jaw clenched tight. His roommate, Jake Sullivan, was everything Marcus wasn't. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, with a deep voice that commanded respect. Jake tried to be supportive, but even he sometimes forgot to take Marcus seriously. "Maybe you should consider a different career path," Jake suggested one evening after a particularly brutal day of combat training. "There's no shame in finding something that fits you better." Marcus spent his nights studying harder than anyone else. While his classmates were out drinking or playing cards, he memorized police codes, studied criminal law, and practiced report writing until his hand cramped. He knew he had to be twice as good as everyone else just to be considered half as capable. The firearms training was where Marcus first showed glimpses of what he was truly made of. His small frame meant less recoil to manage, and his steady hands, honed by years of playing video games and model building, made him incredibly accurate. While bigger recruits struggled with precision shooting, Marcus consistently hit the center of his targets. "Beginner's luck," muttered Trevor Hayes, a former college football player who'd been struggling with his marksmanship scores. Trevor had been one of Marcus's most persistent tormentors, calling him toy cop whenever the instructors weren't listening. But it wasn't luck. Marcus had grown up in a rough neighborhood where his older brother had taught him to shoot bottles in their backyard. His brother Danny had been killed in a drive-by shooting when Marcus was 16. That loss had driven Marcus to pursue law enforcement, though he'd never shared the story with his academy classmates. During tactical training exercises, Marcus's size became an advantage in ways the instructors hadn't expected. He could move through tight spaces quickly and quietly. When they practiced building searches, Marcus could slip through windows and crawl spaces that would challenge larger officers. His small profile made him harder to spot in cover positions. "The kid's got some moves," admitted Officer Rodriguez, one of the training supervisors, watching Marcus navigate an obstacle course with surprising agility. Still, the ridicule continued. During a break between classes, Marcus overheard a group of recruits making bets about whether he'd wash out before graduation. $5 says he quits by next week," laughed Amy Chen, who'd always seemed friendly to his face. The betrayal stung more than the open mockery from people like Trevor. Marcus's breaking point came during a scenario-based training exercise. The recruits were split into teams and given a simulated domestic violence call to respond to. Marcus was paired with Trevor and 2 other recruits who'd made their opinions about him clear. As they approached the mock house, Trevor took charge despite Marcus being assigned as team leader for the exercise. "Stay back, kid," Trevor whispered as they prepared to enter. "Let the real cops handle this." Inside the house, actors played out a volatile situation. A man was threatening his girlfriend while holding what appeared to be a weapon. The scenario was designed to test decision-making under pressure, communication skills, and tactical awareness. Trevor charged in aggressively, immediately escalating the situation. The actor playing the suspect became more agitated, raising his fake weapon. The other recruits followed Trevor's lead, shouting commands and creating chaos. Marcus watched the situation spiral out of control, knowing they were failing the exercise badly. In a real situation, this approach would have gotten people killed. Marcus made a split-second decision that would define the rest of his academy experience. He stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying an unexpected authority. "Sir, I understand you're upset," Marcus said to the actor, completely ignoring Trevor's shocked expression. "Let's talk about what's really bothering you. Your girlfriend looks scared, and I can see you care about her. Help me understand what's happening here." The change was immediate. The actor, trained to respond to different approaches, relaxed slightly. His weapon lowered as Marcus continued talking, using de-escalation techniques they'd studied but rarely practiced effectively. Within minutes, Marcus had talked the suspect into putting down his weapon and submitting to arrest without violence. The training supervisor, watching from another room through cameras, made notes on his clipboard. This was exactly the kind of policing they were trying to teach, using brains over brawn, communication over confrontation. After the exercise, Trevor was furious. "You made us all look bad," he hissed at Marcus in the locker room. Nobody likes a show-off, especially not a fake cop who looks like he should be in high school. But something had shifted. A few of the other recruits had noticed what happened in that room. Sarah Mitchell, one of the smarter recruits, approached Marcus later that day. "That was impressive," she said simply. "You handled that better than anyone else would have." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. For the first time since arriving at the academy, someone had acknowledged his potential rather than his appearance. But he knew the real test was still coming. Graduation was only weeks away, and then he'd face the ultimate challenge, proving himself on the streets where the stakes were real and the margin for error was zero. That night, Marcus called his mother. "How's my baby boy doing?" she asked, using the pet name that had followed him his whole life. "I'm doing fine, Mom," he said, looking at his reflection in his dorm room window. Soon he'd wear a real badge and carry a real gun. The question that kept him awake at night was whether anyone would take him seriously when it mattered most. Little did he know that question would be answered sooner than expected, in ways that would shock everyone who'd ever doubted him. 6 months after graduation, Officer Marcus Williams sat in his patrol car outside Roosevelt High School, watching students pour out of the building. Some pointed and laughed when they saw him through the windshield. Even teenagers thought he looked like one of them rather than a police officer. His first assignment was in the downtown district, partnered with Officer Janet Torres, a 15-year veteran who'd requested him specifically after hearing about his academy performance. Most officers didn't want to work with the baby cop, as dispatch had started calling him behind his back. "Don't let them get to you," Torres advised as they watched a group of teenagers mock him from across the street. "Half these kids have real problems at home. They're just taking it out on whoever's easy to pick on." But it wasn't just teenagers. Marcus had responded to domestic disturbances where suspects laughed in his face, asking if the police department was sending children to do grown-up work. Store owners would ask to speak to a real officer when he responded to shoplifting calls. Even some victims seemed disappointed when he showed up to take their reports. The worst incident happened during his 3rd month on the job. Marcus and Torres responded to a convenience store robbery in progress. The suspect, a man named Carlos Mendez with a history of violent crime, was still inside when they arrived. Through the window, they could see him threatening the elderly clerk with what appeared to be a gun. "I'll take lead on this one," Torres whispered as they positioned themselves outside. But as they prepared to enter, Mendez spotted them through the glass door. His reaction was immediate laughter. "Are you serious?" Mendez shouted loud enough for passers-by to hear. "They sent me a kid cop? What's next, the Boy Scouts?" Other officers arrived as backup, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly through the criminal network that the downtown district had a baby-faced cop who couldn't intimidate anyone. Marcus started getting called to more dangerous situations, as if criminals were testing him deliberately. Captain Rodriguez called Marcus into his office after a month of particularly challenging calls. "Williams, I'm concerned about your effectiveness in the field," he said, reviewing Marcus's reports. "Your arrest numbers are lower than other officers, and I'm getting complaints from citizens who feel they're not being taken seriously." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I've been handling my cases by the book. My report writing scores are among the highest in the precinct, and I haven't had any excessive force complaints." "That's true," Rodriguez acknowledged. "But police work isn't just about following procedures. You need to command respect. People need to fear the consequences of crossing the law." Torres defended him when she could, but Marcus knew his career hung by a thread. He started volunteering for the most dangerous shifts, hoping to prove his worth. Late nights, weekend details, calls in the worst neighborhoods. Marcus took them all. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that everything changed. Marcus was working alone, covering for sick officers during a particularly violent weekend. The call came in at 2:47 a.m., shots fired at the Blue Moon Tavern, multiple suspects still on scene. The Blue Moon was notorious among police officers. Located in the roughest part of the city, it was where drug dealers, gang members, and career criminals gathered. Most officers waited for backup before responding to calls there, especially at night. But Marcus was only 3 blocks away when the call came in, and he could hear more gunshots over the radio. Someone inside might be dying while he waited for backup that was still 15 minutes out. He made the decision that would define his career and possibly his life. As Marcus pulled up to the tavern, he could see muzzle flashes through the front windows. The parking lot was chaos with people running and screaming. His radio crackled with updates from dispatch, but backup was still 10 minutes away. Through his car window, Marcus could see into the bar where 3 armed men were holding patrons hostage. One of them, a tall man with facial tattoos, was waving his gun around wildly while shouting demands. The bartender, a woman in her 50s, was bleeding from a head wound. Marcus knew protocol dictated waiting for backup and establishing a perimeter. But he also knew that people were going to die if he followed protocol. The gunman looked high on something, making him unpredictable and dangerous. Making a decision that went against everything he'd been taught, Marcus left his patrol car and approached the tavern's side entrance. His small size allowed him to move along the building's wall without being spotted through the windows. Inside, he could hear one of the gunmen yelling, "Where's the safe? I know you've got cash hidden somewhere." The sound of breaking glass and terrified sobbing filled the air. Marcus slipped through the unlocked side door, finding himself in the tavern's narrow storage room. From there, he could see into the main bar area where the 3 gunmen had separated the patrons into 2 groups. His radio was turned down to prevent giving away his position. What Marcus saw made his blood run cold. One of the gunmen was becoming increasingly agitated, pointing his weapon at different hostages as if trying to decide who to shoot first. This wasn't a robbery anymore. It was about to become a massacre. The gunman with facial tattoos, who seemed to be the leader, was arguing with his partners. "We're taking too long," he snarled. "Kill one of them to show we mean business, then the bartender will talk." Marcus realized he had perhaps 30 seconds before innocent people started dying. Backup was still 7 minutes out, and even when they arrived, a hostage situation could take hours to resolve. By then, everyone inside would be dead. Looking around the storage room, Marcus spotted something that gave him an idea. The tavern's electrical panel was mounted on the wall next to him. If he could cut the power, the chaos might give him the advantage he needed. But first he needed to position himself better. Using his small size to his advantage, Marcus crawled behind the bar, using the confusion and dim lighting to stay hidden. From this position, he could see all 3 gunmen and most of the hostages. The leader was getting more agitated by the minute. "Time's up," he shouted, raising his gun toward a young woman who was crying in the corner. Maybe watching her die will help everyone remember where the money is. Marcus knew he was out of time. In the next few seconds, he would either save lives or die trying. Everything he'd endured at the academy, all the ridicule and doubt had led to this moment. The boy they'd laughed at was about to show them what real police work looked like. The electrical panel was 20 feet away, but Marcus had to move without being seen. The 3 gunmen were focused on their hostages, but one wrong move would get everyone killed. He took a deep breath and began crawling along the floor behind the bar, using overturned chairs and broken glass as cover. His police training kicked in as he analyzed the situation. The leader with facial tattoos, who the others called Snake, had positioned himself near the front door. The second gunman, younger and clearly nervous, was watching the back exit. The third, a heavy-set man with gold teeth, was guarding the hostages in the center of the room. Marcus reached the electrical panel just as Snake raised his weapon toward the crying woman again. "I'm done playing games," Snake shouted. "Someone's going to die right now if I don't get answers." With no time left, Marcus yanked open the electrical panel and threw the main breaker. The tavern plunged into darkness, lit only by streetlights filtering through the windows. Screams filled the air as hostages scrambled for cover and the gunman began firing wildly into the darkness. "What happened to the lights?" The nervous gunman yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Shut up and find the switch," Snake commanded, but Marcus was already moving. In the chaos and darkness, his small size became his greatest weapon. While the gunmen stumbled around trying to orient themselves, Marcus slipped between overturned tables and terrified civilians. The gold-toothed gunman was closest to Marcus's position. The man was waving his gun around frantically, trying to see in the dim light. Marcus drew his service weapon, knowing he'd have only one chance to get this right. "Police, drop your weapons!" Marcus shouted from the darkness. The gunman spun toward his voice, but Marcus was already moving to a different position. In their panic, they began shooting at shadows, their muzzle flashes giving away their locations while revealing nothing about his. "There's only one cop," Snake realized. "Find him and kill him." But finding Marcus in the dark tavern was like trying to catch smoke. He moved silently between tables and chairs, using every piece of cover available. His academy training in tactical movement, which some instructors had doubted would ever be useful for someone his size, now meant the difference between life and death. The nervous gunman was firing randomly into the darkness, his shots going wide. In his panic, he didn't see Marcus approaching from behind until it was too late. Marcus struck him in the head with his flashlight, dropping him instantly and taking his weapon. "Tommy's down," Goldteeth shouted, spinning toward where his partner had fallen. This gave Marcus the opening he needed. 2 quick shots from Marcus's service weapon and Goldteeth collapsed, clutching his shoulder and leg. The man's weapon skittered across the floor, disappearing into the darkness. Now it was just Marcus and Snake in a deadly game of hide-and-seek. But Snake was smarter than his partners. Instead of panicking, he grabbed the nearest hostage, the injured bartender, and used her as a human shield. "Show yourself, boy cop," Snake called out, pressing his gun against the woman's temple. "I know it's just you in here. Come out or this lady dies right now." Marcus felt his heart pounding. Through the dim light, he could see Snake holding the terrified bartender. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, blood still trickling from her head wound. "I'm counting to 3, Snake announced. 1. Marcus knew he had to act, but Snake was using the hostage perfectly. Any shot Marcus took would risk hitting the innocent woman. 2. Time slowed down as Marcus remembered something from his academy training. His firearms instructor had taught them about ricochet shots, warning them never to attempt such dangerous tactics. But in this moment, with no other options, Marcus saw a possibility. The tavern's old mirrors behind the bar were still intact, angled in a way that might, just might, allow him to see Snake's position while remaining hidden himself. It was an impossible shot that could go wrong in a dozen different ways. 3. Marcus steadied his weapon, using the mirror's reflection to line up a shot he'd never attempted before. He aimed not at Snake directly, but at the metal beer tap next to him, hoping the bullet would ricochet at just the right angle. The sound of Marcus's gunshot echoed through the tavern. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Snake screamed, his weapon falling from his hand as he grabbed his shattered wrist. The ricochet had worked perfectly, disabling him without risking the hostage. Marcus rushed forward, kicking Snake's gun away and placing him under arrest. The bartender collapsed in relief, finally safe after the longest minutes of her life. As Marcus secured the scene, he could hear sirens approaching. Backup was finally arriving, but the crisis was over. 3 dangerous criminals were down, and every hostage was alive. When Captain Rodriguez and the other officers burst through the front door, they found Marcus calmly providing first aid to the wounded bartender, while the 3 gunmen lay defeated around him. "What the hell happened here?" Rodriguez demanded, looking at the scene in disbelief. "Armed robbery turned hostage situation," Marcus reported professionally, though his hands were shaking from adrenaline. 3 suspects apprehended, no civilian casualties. Detective Sarah Hayes, who'd arrived with the backup units, walked through the tavern examining the scene. She'd been a cop for 12 years and had never seen anything like it. "Williams, how did you take down 3 armed suspects by yourself in the dark?" Before Marcus could answer, the bartender spoke up from her stretcher as paramedics prepared to transport her. "That young officer saved our lives," she said firmly. "Those men were going to kill us all. He came in here alone and stopped them." Word of what happened at the Blue Moon Tavern spread through the police department within hours. The story grew with each telling. A baby-faced rookie officer had single-handedly stopped 3 armed gunmen and saved a dozen hostages. But for Marcus, sitting in the precinct later that morning, filling out his report, the most important moment came when Officer Torres approached his desk. "I heard what you did," she said quietly. "That was some real police work." For the first time since joining the force, Marcus felt like he truly belonged. But he had no idea that his actions that night had been captured on the tavern's security cameras. and soon the whole city would know about the young officer they'd been calling a boy. The security footage from the Blue Moon Tavern changed everything. Within 48 hours of the incident, news stations across the city were playing the grainy black and white video on repeat. The footage showed Marcus moving through the darkened tavern like a ghost, taking down 3 armed criminals with precision that seasoned officers found hard to believe. "Hero cop saves dozen lives in daring solo rescue," read the morning headline. The photo accompanying the story showed Marcus in his uniform, looking impossibly young next to his patrol car. The contrast between his boyish appearance and his deadly effectiveness fascinated the public. Captain Rodriguez called Marcus into his office the morning after the story broke. "Williams, my phone hasn't stopped ringing," he said, holding up a stack of messages. "Every news station in the state wants an interview. The mayor's office called 3 times. Even the FBI wants to talk to you about your tactical approach." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The attention made him nervous, especially since he knew many of his fellow officers still harbored doubts about him. "I just did my job, sir. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, they wouldn't have," Rodriguez said firmly. "Most officers would have waited for backup and tried to negotiate. You saw people about to die and you acted. That takes a special kind of courage." But not everyone in the department was celebrating Marcus's success. In the locker room, some of the older officers were less impressed. Detective Frank Morrison, a 20-year veteran, made his feelings clear to anyone who would listen. "Kid got lucky, that's all." Morrison grumbled as he changed into his civilian clothes. "Put any of us in that situation and we'd have handled it just as well. Probably better." Officer Chuck Hayes, Trevor's older brother who'd joined the force 5 years earlier, nodded in agreement. "The media's making him out to be some kind of superhero. It's ridiculous. He's still the same baby-faced rookie who needed help reaching the top shelf in evidence storage last month." Their resentment grew worse when Marcus was selected to receive the department's Medal of Valor, the highest honor given to officers. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month, with the mayor and police commissioner both planning to attend. Meanwhile, the criminal underworld was taking notice of Marcus for very different reasons. In the county jail, Snake, whose real name was Ricardo Vasquez, was telling his story to anyone who would listen. But his version painted Marcus not as a hero, but as someone who'd gotten lucky against unprepared opponents. "The kid caught us off guard in the dark," Snake told his cellmate. "In a fair fight, he wouldn't last 5 minutes. He's still just a boy playing dress-up." This version of events began spreading through the criminal network, carried by inmates being released and visitors who heard the stories. Soon, taking down the boy cop became a matter of pride among gang members and career criminals. Marcus began noticing changes in how criminals responded to him on the street. Instead of laughing at his appearance, they watched him with calculating eyes. Some seemed to be sizing him up, as if trying to figure out whether the stories about the Blue Moon Tavern were real or exaggerated. 3 weeks after the tavern incident, Marcus and Torres responded to a domestic violence call in the Riverside district. The suspect, Danny Razor Martinez, was a known drug dealer with a history of assaulting police officers. When they arrived at the apartment building, Marcus could hear shouting from the 3rd floor. A woman was screaming for help while a man's voice threatened to kill her if she didn't shut up. "This guy's bad news," Torres warned as they climbed the stairs. "He put 2 officers in the hospital last year during a similar call. We should call for backup." But as they reached the 3rd floor, the shouting inside the apartment suddenly stopped. The silence was more frightening than the screaming had been. Marcus knocked on the door. "Police, open up!" The door opened slowly, revealing Razor Martinez holding a kitchen knife to his girlfriend's throat. The woman's face was swollen from recent beatings and terror filled her eyes. "Well, well," Razor sneered when he saw Marcus. "If it isn't the famous boy hero, you don't look so tough without your darkness to hide in." Torres started to move forward, but Razor pressed the knife harder against his girlfriend's neck, drawing a thin line of blood. "Stay back, lady cop," Razor commanded. "I want to talk to Junior here. I heard you think you're some kind of action hero now." Marcus stepped forward slightly, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Let her go, Danny. Whatever's going on between you two, this isn't the way to solve it." Razor laughed, but there was madness in his eyes. "You know what I think? I think you got lucky at that bar. I think you're still the same scared little boy playing cop. Prove me wrong." The situation was escalating quickly. Torres was trying to get a clear shot, but Razor kept moving, using his girlfriend as a shield. Marcus could see the woman was going into shock from blood loss and terror. "You want to be a hero again?" Razor taunted. "Come and take this knife from me. Let's see how tough you are in a real fight." Marcus knew this was exactly what Razor wanted, to goad him into making a mistake that would get the hostage killed. But he could see the woman was weakening, and if she collapsed, Razor might just kill her out of frustration. "Okay," Marcus said, slowly removing his gun from its holster and placing it on the floor. "Let's settle this between us. Just let her go first." "Marcus, what are you doing?" Torres hissed, but he ignored her. Razor's eyes lit up with savage pleasure. "Now you're talking my language, boy cop. But I'm not letting her go until I prove what a fake you really are." Marcus raised his hands, showing he was unarmed. "Then we have a problem, because I'm not fighting you while you're hiding behind an innocent woman." For a moment, Razor looked uncertain. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. He'd expected the boy cop to either back down or make a desperate mistake. Instead, Marcus was calmly taking control of the situation. "Tell you what," Marcus continued, taking another step closer. "Your girlfriend looks like she's about to pass out anyway. When she drops, you won't have a shield anymore. Then it'll just be you and me, and we'll see who's really tough." Razor looked down at the woman in his arms and realized Marcus was right. She was barely conscious, her weight becoming dead weight against him. In a few more seconds, she'd collapse whether he wanted her to or not. "But here's the thing, Danny," Marcus said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I don't need darkness to take you down. I don't need surprise or luck. All I need is for you to make one wrong move." The confidence in Marcus's voice was unnerving. This wasn't the scared rookie Razor had expected to face. This was someone who'd looked death in the face and won. As if sensing his moment, Marcus made his move just as the woman's legs gave out. As the woman collapsed, Marcus moved with lightning speed. He caught her falling body with his left arm, while simultaneously grabbing Razor's knife hand with his right. The move was so fast and unexpected that Razor didn't have time to react. Marcus twisted Razor's wrist using a technique he'd learned in academy training, forcing him to drop the knife. Before the blade even hit the floor, Marcus had spun Razor around and slammed him face first against the apartment wall. "Danny Martinez, you're under arrest," Marcus said calmly, placing handcuffs on the stunned man while Torres called for an ambulance. The whole confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. But word of it spread through the criminal community even faster than the Blue Moon incident had. The boy cop wasn't just lucky, he was dangerous. 6 weeks later, Marcus received news that would change his career trajectory completely. Chief Patricia Williams called him into her office with an unexpected proposition. "Officer Williams," she began, "I've been reviewing your performance over the past few months. Your arrest record, your tactical decisions, your ability to de-escalate dangerous situations, it's all exceptional." Marcus waited, unsure where this was leading. "I'm forming a new unit," the chief continued. "Undercover operations focusing on gang infiltration and drug trafficking. Your appearance, which I know has been a challenge for you, would actually be our greatest asset. Criminals consistently underestimate you, and that gives us an advantage we've never had before. The assignment would mean leaving patrol work behind and entering one of the most dangerous areas of police work. Undercover officers live double lives, constantly surrounded by people who would kill them without hesitation if their true identity was discovered. I need someone who can think quickly under pressure," Chief Williams explained. "Someone who's proven they can handle violent criminals without backup. Your size and appearance would let you get close to suspects that other officers could never reach." Marcus accepted the assignment immediately. Within 2 weeks, he was enrolled in specialized undercover training, learning how to create false identities, blend into criminal organizations, and survive in situations where calling for backup wasn't an option. His first undercover assignment targeted a drug trafficking ring operating out of Lincoln High School. Students were dealing everything from marijuana to fentanyl, and traditional police methods had failed to identify the suppliers. Marcus would pose as a transfer student, despite being 23 years old. On his first day at Lincoln High, Marcus dressed in typical teenage clothing and carried a backpack full of textbooks. His baby face, which had been such a liability in uniform, now made him completely believable as an 18-year-old student. "You look like you're lost." "New kid," said Jessica Chen, a senior who approached him during lunch. Unknown to her, Marcus had been studying her photo for weeks. Intelligence reports suggested she was connected to the drug distribution network. Yeah. Still figuring out where everything is, Marcus replied, adopting the speech patterns and mannerisms he'd practiced. This place is huge compared to my old school. Within 3 days, Marcus had identified the main dealers and was being invited to parties where drugs flowed freely. His ability to blend in was so complete that even students who'd grown up in the neighborhood accepted him as one of their own. The breakthrough came when he was invited to meet Big Mike, the adult supplier who controlled drug distribution for 3 high schools in the district. Mike operated out of an auto repair shop that served as a front for his criminal organization. "You're pretty young to be moving this much product," Big Mike observed when Marcus met him for the first time. Marcus had spent weeks building his reputation as a reliable dealer to earn this meeting. "Age doesn't matter if you can handle business," Marcus replied, using the confidence he'd developed through his police work. Big Mike laughed and offered him a larger territory. "I like your attitude, kid. Maybe we can work something out." Over the following weeks, Marcus gathered evidence on the entire drug network. He recorded conversations, photographed drug transactions, and identified every member of the organization from street dealers to suppliers. The night before the planned arrests, Marcus received an unexpected phone call on his undercover phone. The voice on the other end was one he recognized from his time in patrol. "Marcus Williams," the voice said. It was Snake, Ricardo Vasquez, who'd somehow been released on bail pending his trial for the Blue Moon Tavern incident. Marcus felt his blood run cold. If Snake knew his real identity, his undercover assignment was blown and his life was in immediate danger. "I think you have the wrong number," Marcus replied, trying to maintain his cover. "No, I don't," Snake said with deadly certainty. "I know exactly who you are, boy cop. And I know where you've been spending your time. Did you really think you could fool everyone forever?" The phone went dead, leaving Marcus in a silence that felt like the calm before a storm. He immediately called his handler, Detective Sarah Hayes, who'd been supervising his undercover work. "We need to pull you out now," Hayes said after hearing about Snake's call. "If your cover's blown, you're a dead man walking." But Marcus knew that pulling out now would mean losing months of work and allowing a major drug operation to continue poisoning kids. "Give me 24 hours, he said. "Let me see if I can figure out how much he knows and whether he's told anyone else." Hayes reluctantly agreed, but insisted on having backup units positioned nearby. What neither of them knew was that Snake had already set events in motion that would test everything Marcus had learned about survival. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Lincoln High as usual, but something felt wrong immediately. Students who'd been friendly the day before now avoided eye contact. Teachers seemed nervous, and there were whispers in the hallways that stopped when he approached. During lunch, Jessica Chen approached him with a group of other students Marcus had never seen before. They were older, more dangerous looking, and clearly not high school students. "Marcus," Jessica said, and her use of his real name confirmed his worst fears. "Some people want to talk to you." The trap had been set perfectly. Snake had somehow discovered Marcus's undercover identity and shared that information with the drug network. Now they knew they had a police officer in their midst, and they planned to make an example of him. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, still trying to maintain his cover even though he knew it was useless. One of the older men stepped forward, lifting his shirt slightly to show the gun tucked into his waistband. "No misunderstanding, cop. You've been playing games with the wrong people." Marcus realized he was completely surrounded in the middle of the school cafeteria, with hundreds of innocent students nearby. Any violent confrontation would put civilian lives at risk. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a building with no easy escape routes. As the men began to close in, Marcus made a decision that would either save his life or end it. He couldn't fight his way out without endangering students, and he couldn't run without confirming his identity as a cop. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He laughed. "You guys are really something," Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Jessica, did you set this up?" "This is the best prank anyone's ever pulled on me." The confusion on the faces of his would-be attackers was immediate. Students nearby began paying attention, thinking they were witnessing some kind of elaborate joke between friends. "What are you talking about?" the armed man hissed, trying to keep his voice low. "Come on, man," Marcus continued, clapping the confused gunman on the shoulder like they were old friends. "You almost had me believing you thought I was some kind of undercover cop. That's hilarious. Do I really look that suspicious?" Several students nearby began laughing, thinking it was indeed an elaborate prank. The attention from dozens of teenagers made it impossible for the men to act violently without creating witnesses to a very public crime. Marcus kept up the act, but he was subtly positioning himself closer to the cafeteria's emergency exit. His hand moved to his pocket where he kept a small panic button that would alert his backup units. "Seriously, though," Marcus said to Jessica, "where did you find these guys? They're really committed to the bit." The leader of the group was getting frustrated. This wasn't going according to plan. They'd expected to quietly corner the undercover cop and force him into a situation where they could eliminate him without witnesses. Instead, he'd turned their ambush into a public spectacle. "Enough games," the leader growled, reaching for his weapon. That's when Marcus pressed his panic button and made his move. He grabbed Jessica and pushed her toward other students, getting civilians out of the line of fire, then flipped over a cafeteria table to create cover. "Everyone get down," Marcus shouted, his police training taking over. "This is not a drill." The school erupted into chaos as students screamed and ran for exits. The armed men, now exposed in the middle of a fleeing crowd, found themselves in the worst possible tactical position. Marcus drew his backup weapon, a small pistol he'd concealed despite the risk of blowing his cover, and began directing students toward safety while keeping the gunmen pinned down behind overturned tables. The failed attempt at Lincoln High School marked the beginning of an all-out war between Marcus and the criminal underworld. Within 48 hours of the school incident, 3 separate attempts were made on his life. Snake had put out a contract worth $50,000 for anyone who could kill the boy cop. Chief Williams called Marcus into her office along with Detective Hayes and Captain Rodriguez. The gravity of the situation was written on all their faces. "Marcus, we need to talk about your safety," Chief Williams began. "Intelligence suggests that Snake has connections throughout the state prison system and several major criminal organizations. This isn't just about revenge anymore, you've become a symbol." "A symbol of what?" Marcus asked. "Of everything they hate about law enforcement," Rodriguez explained. "You're young, you're effective, and you've made them look like fools repeatedly. Taking you down would send a message to every cop in the city." Hayes spread several photographs across the desk. "These are some of the people we know are looking for you. Career criminals, gang members, even some dirty cops who've been paid off. The price on your head is attracting attention from professional killers." Marcus studied the faces, recognizing some from his time on patrol and undercover work. "So what are my options? Witness protection? Transfer to another state?" "We could do that," Chief Williams said. "But there's another option. We could turn this situation to our advantage." She explained her plan. Instead of hiding Marcus, they would use him as bait to draw out the criminal network that was hunting him. It was an incredibly dangerous strategy that would require Marcus to essentially paint a target on his back, while backup units monitored from a distance. "It's voluntary," she emphasized. "No one would blame you for choosing the safer option." Marcus thought about his brother Danny, killed in a drive-by shooting when Marcus was 16. He thought about the bartender at the Blue Moon Tavern and the students at Lincoln High School. Every time he'd run from a fight, innocent people had suffered. "I'll do it," he said. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. Marcus would return to regular patrol duties, making himself visible and accessible to anyone trying to collect the bounty on his head. Meanwhile, undercover officers would monitor known criminal hangouts, and surveillance teams would track any suspicious activity around Marcus. The first test came within a week. Marcus was having lunch at a downtown diner when 2 men entered and sat at the counter near him. He recognized one of them from the photos Hayes had shown him, a hired gun named Tommy the Knife Morrison. Marcus continued eating his sandwich, pretending not to notice the men while activating a recording device hidden in his jacket. The backup team was positioned across the street, but they couldn't intervene until Marcus was in immediate danger. "That him?" Tommy whispered to his partner, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Yeah, that's the boy cop," came the reply. "Doesn't look like much, does he?" Marcus paid his bill and left the diner, walking casually down the street toward his patrol car. He could hear footsteps behind him, staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion. As he reached his car, Marcus pretended to fumble with his keys. This gave the 2 men time to get closer, while also signaling his backup team that the situation was escalating. "Excuse me, officer," Tommy called out as Marcus opened his car door. Marcus turned. his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Tommy smiled, but his hand was moving toward something concealed under his jacket. "We heard you were looking for some bad guys. Well, you found us." What happened next took less than 10 seconds but would be analyzed by police trainers for years to come. As Tommy reached for his gun, Marcus dove behind his patrol car while simultaneously drawing his weapon and calling for backup over his radio. Tommy's first shot shattered the rear window of Marcus's patrol car. His second shot went wide as Marcus returned fire from behind the engine block. The backup team, monitoring from nearby buildings, immediately moved in. But Tommy's partner had positioned himself to cut off Marcus's escape route. As Marcus moved around the car to avoid Tommy's gunfire, he walked directly into the second gunman's trap. "Drop your weapon, boy cop," the partner commanded, his gun pointed directly at Marcus's chest from 10 feet away. Marcus realized he was caught in crossfire. Tommy was shooting at him from one side while his partner had him covered from the other. The backup team was still 30 seconds away, and Marcus had nowhere to take cover. Time seemed to slow as Marcus assessed his options. He could surrender and hope the backup team arrived before he was executed, or he could try to fight his way out against impossible odds. Instead, he chose a third option that no one expected. Marcus holstered his weapon and raised his hands. "Okay, you got me," he said. "But before you pull that trigger, you should know something about the bounty Snake put on my head." Both men hesitated, curious despite themselves. "Snake's not paying $50,000 for a dead cop," Marcus continued, improvising desperately. "He's paying $50,000 for a cop who's brought to him alive. He wants to kill me personally." It was a complete bluff, but it worked. Tommy lowered his gun slightly, suddenly uncertain. "He didn't say anything about bringing you in alive," Tommy's partner said, but there was doubt in his voice. "Think about it," Marcus pressed. "Would Snake really trust someone else to finish what he started at the Blue Moon? He wants to do this himself, face to face." The two gunmen looked at each other, and Marcus saw the greed in their eyes. If he was right, capturing him alive would be worth much more than just killing him on the street. That moment of hesitation was all Marcus needed. As the men debated whether to kill him or capture him, his backup team finally arrived. The sound of screeching tires and shouted police commands filled the air. Tommy spun toward the approaching officers, firing wildly in their direction. His partner made the fatal mistake of turning his back on Marcus to see what was happening. Marcus drew his weapon and fired twice, dropping the partner immediately. Tommy, caught between Marcus and the backup officers, threw down his weapon and surrendered. As the dust settled and the scene was secured, Marcus realized something important had changed. For the first time since joining the police force, he felt like he truly belonged. The other officers looked at him not as a kid playing dress-up, but as a dangerous and effective cop who'd earned their respect through blood and courage. Detective Hayes approached him as paramedics checked him for injuries. "That was some quick thinking with the bounty story," she said. "How did you know they'd believe you?" "I didn't," Marcus admitted. "But greed makes people stupid, and stupid people make mistakes." 3 months later, Snake's trial for the Blue Moon Tavern incident finally went to court. He was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The bounty on Marcus's head disappeared along with Snake's freedom. Marcus received his second commendation, this time for his work in dismantling the drug network and surviving multiple assassination attempts. But more importantly, he'd earned something money couldn't buy: the respect of his fellow officers and the fear of the criminals who'd once laughed at him. The boy they'd mocked had become the cop they feared most. And in a city where respect meant survival, Marcus Williams had finally found his place. Standing in his dress uniform at the awards ceremony, Marcus looked out at an audience filled with fellow officers, city officials and citizens whose lives he'd touched. He thought about the long journey from that first day at the police academy, when everyone had doubted whether he belonged. Now nobody was laughing.